Turn to the gentleman from Wisconsin, Bryan Steil, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for holding today's hearing. This is a really important topic. CDBC gives me significant concern as it relates to Americans' privacy. We've seen our privacy invaded in a number of ways. I think a federal government CDBC would be a worse situation. In particular, I don't think the Federal Reserve has the authority to do a CBDC. I think that's important to note. I don't think Congress should give the Federal Reserve authority to do the CBDC. And the reason is based on the federal government having access into that level of information about American citizens. And I think some of the distinction from the previous question as it relates to the ability to track this is whether or not that information is in a depository of your federal government or if that's in records in the private business sector. And I think it's important that we pull this distinction apart. If I can, let me shift gears slightly though, and come over as it relates to liquidity in the market. In Ms. Paradon, in your testimony you wrote, any transfer of a dollar deposit from a commercial bank or credit union to a CDBC is a dollar unavailable for lending to businesses or consumers. Can you expand a little bit on that statement about how an adoption of an intermediated CBDC how would it impact credit and availability and the cost of banking services?
Sure, happy to, thank you. So I think there's a misconception generally that a dollar transferred from a deposit account to a CBDC that CBDC would still be able to be used for lending and investment in the economy the way that dollar deposits currently are now. And that is not the case. A CBDC, even if intermediated, in other words, even if the services, including onboarding and other services that commercial banks currently provide, even if those services were provided by banks with respect to a consumer's CBDC, the fact is the bank would really only hold that CBDC in the same manner it holds an asset in custody. So it would have to essentially keep that CBDC under the proverbial mattress, and it would not be able to be redeployed in the form of loans.
So thank you very much. So let me build on this if I can, Mr. Michel. In particular, how that would impact monetary policy, if you take what Ms. Paradon just said.
Well, it would have a large impact in the sense that it would be very different from what we're doing now. You would have where we have a predominantly privately provided system of money or amount of money. You would no longer be doing that, or until you get there, you would be raising the cost of doing so in presumably some other method. Not the traditional banking sector through intermediation process that we have now. And what everybody has to understand is that this would allow the government to put money directly into accounts as well as take it out. And nobody ever wants to talk about that one. When things are going, and ironically, when things are going bad and a recession's coming, that's when you would see the Fed want to go toward negative interest rates, and everybody would stop and say, wait, what are we doing? And the only way to do that is to provide zero options for anybody to use any other payment method. So to get all of those benefits, you have to, at some point, make this the only option, not just another option.
Let me shift gears with you, Mr. Michel, because I know you didn't have enough time to respond to this on the privacy question. Does your privacy concerns have to do with the CBDC being government-controlled rather than private sector-controlled?
Yes, that's correct.
And so how does that play out? So as we think about maybe like China going forward with the CBDC, having none of the constitutional privacy rights of an American citizen, and if we think about that from the government standpoint versus an American private sector standpoint, how should policymakers think of that?
Well, I'm of the view that of the private sector, you have many different companies doing many different things, and if people decide that they're not doing something that they like, there is a remedy for that. There's always a remedy for that. Whereas if you have the government dictating what can and cannot be done, then that's the only one thing that can be done, which is why we have the Fourth Amendment in the first place.
I think that's a really important distinction here. The CBDC puts the power in the hands of the federal government rather than in the hands of the private sector. Correct. I think there's a major distinction between American capitalism and a government-centric approach that we'd also see in China. I thank the chairman for having today's hearing. I yield back.
Gentleman yields.